Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about the 2024 NFL Draft class of the Indianapolis Colts based on data. So, we're going to look at production, athleticism, and other statistical factors of the draft class to see what their chance is of becoming long term successful players. So, if you're new to the channel, new to the stuff that I do, I would definitely consider you check out my top 50 prospects video. That video will go into detail of how I grade prospects, the process with it, the correlations, everything like that. So if you don't think data matters, go to that video. I think it'll really be insightful to you. But I would also say stay tuned into the end of the video where I reveal the final grade for the Colts. So make sure you stay tuned to the end. But we're going to go to every single pick and grade them using data. So what do I do? Well, one thing I do is I look at draft pick approximate value, which essentially is the expectation metric. So this looks at what is the expectation of a draft pick based on where they were drafted at. So, for example, looking at Leatu Latu, most players picked between 11 and 15 typically end up becoming a 92 percentile NFL player at the next level. So in other words, they produce 92% better than the vast majority of NFL players. So that would be the expectation. Does Latu Latu have a data score that is going to put him in contention to meet that expectation? Well, what are data scores? Well, this is another aspect of things. This is called EAV, or expected approximate value, which is also known as a ceiling grade. So this is the data score. This takes a look at their production, their athleticism, their physical metrics, their other statistical categories, and boils it down into one number, and that one number can give you a whole lot of insight. So for example, I'm not going to go into great detail about this, which you can go to my other video to get that, but about 86% of long-term starting prospects at every single position you can imagine typically had a 70 or higher data grade. So anything below that mark, you start getting to an area of prospects that mainly bust or have a very low shot of becoming long-term successful players. So in other words, if the player doesn't have a 70 or higher data grade, you probably shouldn't draft them, or at the very least, if you do draft them, you have to understand the risks involved with taking a player like that. There is no safe picks, though, because again, with probability is not certainty. So just because a prospect has a 99 percentile data grade does not mean that they're automatically going to become a successful prospect. But by and large, across the draft stream, if you will, the correlations remain the same. So make sure you pay attention to the data grades, and that's going to be how I grade this class in many ways based on data. Other things to look at, so these are things that are limiting factors. These are things that limit the data, things that can affect it. So you can pause the video here, but this kind of just goes over all the common criticisms of data, things that can't be anticipated, all that kind of stuff, which kind of goes into there. I'm already aware of it. I'm just letting you know ahead of time. These are some of the things that can affect the data to where it may not be as accurate because of these particular situations right here. Then, of course, we get to the Colts overall draft needs. So this is all the prospects. So prior to the draft, I did a general needs assessment of the Colts. I looked at all the prospects they had on their roster to see what do they need. What positions do they need based on how they actually performed, which is what the NFL positional AV value is. So that takes a look at how these prospects actually performed. It takes a look at their data grades, which is on the right hand side. That's how they performed in terms of their pre-draft evaluation. And then from there, we get into the overall needs per on offense and defense. So the top needs that I identified based on that chart I created was quarterback, running back, offensive line, and tight end on the offensive side of the football. And the defensive side of the football, which had many more needs in many ways, it was linebacker, cornerback, defensive tackle, and edge. So those are probably the biggest needs for this team. Defensively would probably be the biggest area they need to improve upon. So that's going to factor into the grading. So did they meet their roster needs? Based on what I did, the biggest needs I saw was linebacker, cornerback, defensive tackle, and running back. So when I do my final grade, I'm going to factor in that. Did they get a linebacker? Did they get a cornerback? Did they get a defensive tackle? Did they get a running back? Did they draft good prospects? That's another big thing. because just because you draft a linebacker doesn't mean that they're going to become a good prospect long term. So, how do we grade that? Well, we look at their data grade. Typically, if a prospect scores a 70 or higher data grade, they're going to get a greater score in terms of my grading system. But that's just kind of how I do that. And then the last part of this is, did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? It always bugs me every single season when teams will draft a player who has like a 30 percentile data grade in the seventh round. And the reason why is because the seventh round already has a low hit rate. Okay. From Jump Street, taking a player in the seventh round is basically almost sealing their sentence as an NFL prospect. Very few of those players end up becoming long term starters in many ways. But when you take a player with a 30 percentile data grade, you're decreasing their chances of being successful by tenfold in many ways, because most of the prospects that broke out as seventh rounders had above average data grades. They had 80 to 70 or 90 percentile data grades in the seventh round, but were given an opportunity and finally took off. So remember that simple fact, okay? In terms of my data grades and my evaluations, is make sure you draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status. So with all that stuff out of the way, let's get into their draft picks. So starting with pick 15 and Latu Edge out of UCLA. His data grade is 85.36. His floor is 79.14 with a balanced grade of 82. Pick AV is 95.37. The biggest reason why his data grade was so low is a couple different things. One is age, and two is he did lack some athleticism traits. So let's get into what those things were. So first off, in terms of defensive market share scores, his defensive data was pretty decent, 70 percentile in terms of solo tackle data. Sack and TFL data was also pretty decent. Not really near the Pro Bowl threshold for his solo tackle data, but definitely a good profile all around. Then when you get to his other market share scores, forced fumble market share and pass deflection market share, he did have really good forced fumble market share, which is a good mark for him there. And then when you get to athleticism testing, this is the thing that dropped him down a little bit, was his explosion score. So he had a 33 percentile explosion score with above average speed and above average flexibility. Most prospects, especially Pro Bowl, All Pro, and starter prospects, have above average explosiveness. So this doesn't take him out of Pro Bowl potential, though, because again, when you look at the Pro Bowl threshold, the threshold is 30 percentile, but it just kind of gives you in that frame of mind that, okay, he does lack some athleticism traits that could affect his overall outcome at the next level. Then, of course, you get to adjusted production traits. Adjusted production takes a look at production for their age, their level of competition, and the team that they're on. And based on this number, he had a 31 percentile age score, which again was a big thing that kind of dropped his grade a little bit. And then 76 percentile in terms of MSA and 83.91 in terms of pass. So he's not quite near the starter averages, with many reasons being his age. But I think his overall athleticism, his where he was drafted, all that stuff should factor into his grade. I think based on that, I think you could see him becoming a long-term starter at the next level with some Pro Bowl potential as well. So I do like Latu. I don't necessarily think he's the best edge in terms of data potential, but he is at least the most polished edge in this class from a film perspective. And I think he'll do the Colts pretty well with him being the first pick for them. Then, of course, we get to pick 52 and Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver out of Texas. His data grade was 94.80. His floor is 72. His balance is 83, with a pick AV of 77.99. Overall pick grade would be a A. Taking a look at his athleticism, or I should say production traits, he had above average touchdown percentage, 76 percentile, but his other scores were below average. So his receiving market share and total offensive market share were below average. Then when you look at his efficiency traits, he was above average in these as well, but he wasn't exactly elite. So he did have pretty good, yards per reception and TD percentage, but he wasn't exactly in the 80 or 90 percentile in terms of this particular area. Then when you get to his athleticism traits, he tested extremely well, 95 percentile in explosion and 94 percentile in terms of speed. These are great traits for him. And then when you get to his adjusted production traits, based on his age and his overall production traits, great all-around profile. I do like Adonai Mitchell. I don't believe the Colts really had a major need at wide receiver based on the needs assessment that I did. But hey, you got a player that I think could impact them pretty well and could add more depth to that, position, if you will. So I do like it from that perspective. Then, of course, we get to pick 79 and Matthew Gonclave's offensive tackle out of Pittsburgh. His data grade is 83.17, 75.53 is the floor, and 79.35 is the balance grade. Overall pick AV here was 59.85, and overall pick grade would be a B. So this is a pretty solid selection as well. Athleticism-wise, he had a 74 percentile speed score, but no other real athleticism traits to kind of look at with him based on the work that I've done. But still a guy that I think has the physical metrics and enough athleticism to turn into something interesting at the next level. So he was a good selection. Then, of course, we get to pick 117 and Tanner Bortolini, offensive guard at Wisconsin. Based on his data grade, he had 98.42. In terms of that, his floor is 72.97. His balance grade is 85. And his pick AV was 47.88. This overall pick grade would be an A. Taking a look at his athleticism traits, it's off the charts. 91 percentile in terms of explosiveness, 95.66 in terms of speed, and 99.74 in terms of flexibility for his size. This is fantastic traits for him based on his overall athleticism traits, and I do like him from that kind of perspective. Then, of course, we get to pick 142 and Anthony Gold, wide receiver at Oregon State. Another wide receiver. Again, I didn't really see wide receiver as a major need for them, but I guess they did. Based on his data grade, he had a 55.57 data grade. Floor is 40. Balance grade is 47. Pick AV is 42, with overall pick grade being an F. So why did he test so poorly? Well, production-wise, below average market share production overall for his profile. When you look at his efficiency scores, not quite the best in terms of efficiency. Has decent yards per reception, but his TD percentage is not that impressive. And then when you look at his athleticism traits, above average explosiveness, above average speed, and then when you look at flexibility for his size, doesn't quite hit those marks that you want to hit. Kind of below average. I would say slightly above average, but not exactly impressive in terms of flexibility for his size. And then when you get to his adjusted production traits, he did get above the starter average in that particular area, but not quite near the Pro Bowl or All Pro averages at the position. I think Anthony Gold would be kind of a good sort of rotational wide receiver prospect for them. But again, I didn't really see the need for him. Maybe they saw the need, but I didn't really see the need based on needs assessment of them. Then, of course, we get to pick 151 and Jalen Carley's from safety from Missouri. His data grade is 81.19. His floor is 45. His balance grade is 63. His pick AV is 43.63. And his overall pick grade would be a B. Taking a look at his production traits, 88 percentile in terms of solo tackle data, 92 percentile in terms of interceptions, and 63.91 in terms of pass deflection data. So decent all-around production for him. When you look at his athleticism traits, below average athleticism overall, which is why he went where he went. So not the best athlete. And when you get to strong safety adjusted production, he did well in terms of pass. So his production for his level of competition and the team that he played on was very good, but age-wise wasn't the best for him. And then, of course, we get to pick 164 and Jalen Simpson, safety out of Auburn. His data grade or ceiling is 71.13. Projected floor is 40.14. Balance grade is 55.64. Pick AV is 39.77. I would give this overall grade a C based on his production traits. He had really good interception data and pass deflection data, but not quite the same in terms of solo tackles. When you look at his athleticism traits, really great explosion and speed score, not the great best in terms of flexibility. And when you get to his adjusted production traits, not the best in terms of adjusted production. So not the most productive guy, does have good athleticism traits, kind of inconsistent in terms of flexibility, but we'll see what happens with him. This is a solid profile against somebody who could potentially become a long-term starter, but does have some liability because of his change of direction athleticism traits. Then, of course, we get to pick 201 and Micah Abraham, cornerback out of Marshall. His data grade is 49.29. His floor is 27.58. His balance grade is 38.44 with a pick AV of 31.66. Overall pick grade for this would be a F. Taking a look at his production traits, he had an 85 percentile interception score with a 97 percentile pass deflection score and a below average solo tackle score. So decent production overall for him, but athletically speaking, he has above average speed with below average explosiveness and below average flexibility. So he's more so a speed corner than anything else. Doesn't have the best change of direction skills, which means he might be a liability in coverage. it's possible based on his athleticism traits. And then when he gets his adjusted production, he had decent adjusted production, in the 70 percentile area, but his age was a little bit of a limiting factor for him. But overall, not a terrible pick, not the best pick either. Somebody who does have good athleticism traits, some good production traits, but they probably could have went some other directions here. Then, of course, we get to pick 234 and Jonah from defensive tackle from Oklahoma. His data grade is 75 percentile. His projected floor is 25. His balance grade is 50, and his pick AV is 4.25. Overall pick grade for them would be a C. Taking a look at his market share production, he had a 51 percentile solo tackle score, 71 percentile sack score, and 62 percentile tackle for loss score. These are great numbers for him to hit as sort of a developmental tackle in some ways. Then, of course, you get to his other market share scores. Great pass deflection, not the best pass deflection, but good forced fumble data and good interception data for him. And then when you get to athleticism traits, 92 percentile in terms of explosiveness, with above average speed and flexibility. He tested like a really unique five technique in many ways. So he's not the fastest or has the best change of direction skills, but he does have really good lower body strength, which I think is something that could be utilized on the defensive side of the football. And then his adjusted production traits weren't the best, for his age, for his level of competition, all those other sort of things. Because again, most of his production, his best production was at Hawaii. So his production is viewed through the lens of Hawaii, and as a result, his scores aren't the best here. Because when he went to Oklahoma, he didn't quite produce the same way that he did at Hawaii, which is kind of why he fell as far as he did. Overall, though, when you look at the Colts draft, I would give them a final grade of a C plus. Did they meet all of their roster needs? I would say yes and no. Did they draft good prospects? Yes and no. Did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? I would say yes and no. The Colts ranked 12 out of 32 teams based on talent and value in my particular system. But overall, decent draft. There are some good picks here and there, but there also is a lot of risk with a lot of them as well. So we'll see what happens with it, but I do think there are going to be some good prospects from this draft, and I'm excited to see who they are once the NFL season finally kicks off. With all this stuff out of the way, thanks so much for watching. My name is Jim Coburn. You can check out my other work at patreon.com/jcoburn. Check out my formerly known as Twitter account at Geometrics, and also check out and purchase the 2024 NFL Draft Class Analytics Guide available today. 678 pages of data goodness. Pretty much every prospect I talked about today is in that guide with a couple players here and there, but it's well worth the investment to get that guide. It goes over so many different things about draft evaluation. I think it's worth every penny for it. So, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.